You don't have to do your practices the same every day, but the structure so that the kids can know what to expect, I think, is really important. And then just making sure, whether it's chipping, full swing, and putting, do a good combination of block practice, variable practice. So you're giving the player a little bit of freedom, yet they're working on the things you want them to work on.
Hi, this is Ted Bishop along with Crystal Morse, and we'd like to welcome you to episode 5 of the High School Golf Podcast. And today, Crystal, we're going to talk about how to structure an effective practice session.
Yeah, I think this is going to be really relevant to a lot of coaches in high school, and even if we have any middle school golf coaches listening to this. But a lot of high school golf programs are going to benefit from some of the tips that we have from today, and how to structure your practice, how to be effective, and how to really get the most out of your kids during practice.
Yeah, no question about it. And, here in Indiana, the boys' season lasts approximately 90 days. The girls' season only lasts 65 days. And I always use this analogy with our girls to talk about how important practice sessions are. So if you figure the girls' season in Indiana is 65 days, that includes 9 Sundays, 18 events that we would play in, days of competition, along with hopefully 4 additional events that are IHSA related. And so that only leaves us a total of 34 potential practice days during our girls' season. And if you figure on an average 2 hours a day, we only have 68 hours of practice time during the entire girls' season. So making solid use of that time is very important to having a successful team.
Yeah, and especially with the girls, because the girls are in the fall, they're just coming out of the summertime. The importance for them to put in that practice time during the summertime. So you can't come to start the golf season and not be prepared. For the girls coming out of the summer, going into the fall, you have to do a lot of your preparation, whether it's lessons, tournaments. A lot of your practice time needs to start way prior to the season and needs to be taking place all summer so that you can really hit the ground running when the season starts, because we don't have a lot of time to improve, make you better, work on swing fundamentals, things like that. You need to come to practice ready to go. Now, the boys' season is a little bit different. So we just started the boys' season 2 weeks ago, and talk a little bit about the boys' season. We do have a little bit more time with the boys, so we do structure things, kind of take the approach a little bit different with them.
Well, we do, and I think the challenge with boys in Indiana, you start March 17th this year, and I know our first competition date's not until April 12th, and right now we're on spring break, so we kind of lose the momentum that we build up. But I think the challenge you have with boys, also because you have this long period of time before your first competition, the practice days can become very repetitive. They can, if you don't make them interesting or you don't change things up, I suppose there's a good chance your players can get bored. And I think the other challenge you have with boys golf is finding effective ways to practice in the weather. And we're going to talk a lot about that. Particularly this spring has been brutally windy, which makes it real difficult to do some positive things outside. I know you're a big believer in the value of stats and how it helps us as coaches structure practices. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Right. And I'll give you all the credit on this. I mean, you keep the stats. So for our program, you are definitely the keeper of the stats. You're very good, very organized as far as that goes. We wouldn't be nearly as effective if your record keeping wasn't as good as it was. But the way that we use stats, and I think a lot of players, especially your new players, maybe your freshmen and your sophomores that are a little less experienced, a player may think that they need to work on something. Maybe a lot of players, I need to get better off the tee. I need to get more consistency off the tee, which there is a place for that. But the stats that we keep, especially when we're going out to play, whether it's qualifying or just our rounds that we're trying to get the kids out to play, we have them keep how many putts they have. The putts have to be on the green. Your ball has to be on the green. If your ball's on the fringe, that does not count as a putt. So we have them keep the number of putts. We have them keep greens in regulation. And there's, constantly, even during my instruction or during practice, I always make sure that the kids know what a green in regulation is. there's a lot of freshmen or newer golfers that do not know what a green in regulation is. And basically that is on a par 3, you're hitting the green in 1 shot. Par 4, you're hitting the green in 2 shots. Par 5, you're hitting the green in 3 shots. So just simply making sure that your players know what a green in regulation is. I think this is a kind of an eye-opener for a lot of the kids and getting them to realize really in a 9-hole round of golf for just our average kid that's going to be shooting even in the mid 80s, they're not going to hit that many greens in regulation. In a 9-hole round, you may hit 2 or 3 greens in regulation. That means on your 6 other holes, you're going to be chipping. Right? So the importance, it kind of helps them realize the importance of chipping. And I think it helps them manage their expectations of like, hey, your goal here, like you're not going to hit 9 greens in regulation. That's not within your realm right now. That's not our expectations. And just getting them to kind of realize that is a super important stat. And then fairways hit, which I'm going to say out of the 3 stats, that's one that's probably could be a little overrated depending on the player. I mean, if some players will see if they miss a fairway, they may only miss it by 5 yards, and they're still in pretty good shape. So, but it's still an important stat so that we can see kind of what they're doing. And this helps us structure practice and it helps us communicate with our players where they really need to work on and kind of put that perspective with them.
Yeah, I think the other one that's important are obviously up and down percentages. And this would be any time that you miss a green in regulation and you chip on and you one putt and you save par. I just want to finalize one good point that you made. I used this analogy with our players last week. If a player goes out and shoots 82 and they hit 6 greens in regulation, they shoot 82, they're probably going to hit 6 or 7 greens in regulation. That means that they had 11 or 12 chances to chip the ball close, one putt, and save par. That same player that shot 82 is probably going to have 33 or 34 putts during the course of the round, I'm going to guess. So that would mean that approximately 44 of their 82 shots that they took were around the green or on the green, more than 50% of their shots. So that really kind of sets the stage for us as coaches to be able to talk about how important chipping and putting in the short game is to golf, and therein lies how we would structure a lot of our practices.
And I think that communication is important, even as adults, as experienced golfers. We know the importance of short game. As high school kids, when I put myself back in that time frame as when I was a high school player, I did not think about that. Okay, I didn't have, that wasn't even on my mindset. I didn't really think of it in these terms. So just being able to communicate, and not even just communicating once, but like communicating consistently. You know how many distractions the high school kids have nowadays. So you can't just say things one time and expect them to really be like, oh, yeah, that's a great point, coach, and just remember it for the rest of the season. Like, this has to be a pretty consistent message in every practice that we're in. And that's, I think, one thing that we've learned. It's got to be a consistent message every time.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about how we would start our typical practice. And I think here's the thing that everybody has to be reminded of when you're coaching high school players is they've been in a classroom. They've been doing a lot of things with their brain all day long. So when they get to the golf course, I firmly believe they need a little bit of some type of a mental release before you can just totally engage them into practice. So what we typically do is we tell our players to meet us on the putting green at 3:15 p.m. Our school gets out at 2:45. And basically, that first 15 minutes of time that they're on the putting green, I kind of view to be their social time. Maybe they've seen each other during school, maybe not. Maybe they're talking about last night's game, whatever the case may be. But I think the players need that release. I really do, to get them into a proper frame of mind where they can then go to work for a couple of hours. So once that 15 minutes is over with, then we will immediately go into some type of constructive putting period. And that can range from 20 to 30 minutes at least. And we'll get into some of the specific drills that we will do with putting. But that's kind of how we start the practice.
Don't leave out our team meeting. Right. So usually after that first 15 minutes, we kind of let the guys do, what they want to do on the putting green. They're talking and kind of putting around. But then we get all the guys together And then we'll discuss now kind of what we're going to do this practice. If there was any tournaments, we'll obviously discuss the performance and our kind of coach's perspective. So we kind of have a little team meeting to kind of start practice. We set the stage with we'll talk about our stats. We'll talk about things like that. So any relevant team topics of what's coming up for the week. Mondays are kind of a big day because we'll talk about what's coming up for the week, what they can expect, and anything going on that week. So about a 5-minute team meeting before we get into the specifics.
Right. Now, we have the luxury here at the Legends of having a really big practice putting green. It's got about 11,000 square feet in it. Not too many people, have that ability. We have 8 players on our team. So when we start these putting drills, we can have everyone spread out and get away from each other on the putting green. If your putting green's not that big, then you're probably going to have to break this up into different groups to practice effectively. But one of the things I really like to spend some time on is what I call a speed putting drill. And basically, very simple. You get 3 tees. You step off 5 paces for 15 feet, 10 paces for 30 feet, and 15 paces for 45 feet. And the players take 3 balls and they putt to the collar from those distances. When you putt to the collar, you putt back to the tee. Same distance, different direction. That was really effective the other day. We had a 40-mile-an-hour wind, and so I had the thing set up so the players were putting half their putts down grain, downwind, and then the other half were into the wind, into the grain. So there's a big disparity in what the speed of the putt's going to be, but trying to get them to understand these are things you have to identify while you're playing. The other thing that I do a lot of putting instruction, and I'm a firm believer when you look at these statistics in high school golf and you look at 3 putts, and all of us as coaches are trying to eliminate 3 putts. 3 putts are a result of 2 failures. Number 1, they didn't get the lag putt as close as it needed to be. Secondly, if that's the case, it's tough, in my opinion, to have great expectations on making putts when you're in that 6 to 12 foot range. If you're hitting lag putts and that's the leave that you're getting, then odds are you're going to have a lot of 3 putts, because even on the PGA Tour, the percentage of made putts from 6 to 12 feet is not great. So our goal with lag putting is to try to get the ball inside 4 feet, and then we spend a lot of time also practicing 4-footers. And I'm just not a big fan of, particularly before a round is being played from a competitive standpoint, of a player spending a lot of time out there grinding on 10 to 15 foot putts, because I want to leave that putting green with a lot of positive energy. And I'm going to do that with effective lag putting and by making a lot of short putts that I can refer to mentally when I'm out there on the course playing. We took our guys up to see Gary Gann at Chestnut Hills in Fort Wayne a couple of years ago, and Gary's one of the foremost short game instructors. He was a great player himself and lived on a short game, and he talked about this, how to practice putt before a round. And I love this, because how many times, Crystal, do we go to a tournament, particularly if it's a shotgun start, and the putting green is flooded with people? There's multiple people putting at the same hole. It's just impossible to get anything done. And what Gant encouraged our players to do is go to the ends of the putting green where there were no holes, where there was no one at, and use these tees and putt both directions. He's like, that's all you're trying to do before a round of golf, is determine the speed of the greens. It's not about how many putts I make. It's just getting a feel down for the speed. So these are just some little tips. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on, what to do to prepare and how to practice putt. Your wheelhouse, in my opinion, is chipping, setting up stations, and doing all that stuff effectively. So talk about that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I enjoy is creating structure for practices, right? And I think it's important to have a loose structure for your practices. Just meaning, yes, you want to give the kids freedom to work on what they want to work on or need to work on. But at the same time, they're high school kids. Their practice is going to look different than maybe the practice that I would structure for them. So it's a loose structure. A lot of times what we'll do, let's just use the other day for an example. It was super windy out. We knew we weren't going to get a lot of constructive full swing work, in 30-mile-an-hour winds. So, didn't really want to battle that. So we created chipping stations. So you had half the guys over on the putting green. You were working on these putting drills. I took the other half over to the chipping green and we were working on chipping drills. And so this was a great exercise too in getting that 60-degree wedge out of their hand and getting them to learn how to flight their wedges a little bit better. They had 10 golf balls, and the first station we were at was about a 30-yard shot. It was an into the wind shot. So I said, guys, your best shot here is not going to be with a high 60 degree. We're trying to use a little bit lower lofted wedge. We need to, flight our ball a little bit lower into the wind. And so we worked on that, but we did it in 10 ball increments. So we hit 10 golf balls and then worked on a few things, kind of got them used to, okay, what do we need to do? Ball position needs to be a little further back in our stance. Pay attention to how you're setting your club down. Are you adding loft? Are you decreasing loft? Things like that. And then we did another 10 balls. So basically they hit 20 balls from that station. Then we did that at 3 different stations, 3 different locations, like a short-sided chip, kind of a longer chip, downwind, into the wind, side wind. Then we did an up and down exercise where I said, okay, you're taking 1 ball, go get your putter. You're going to pick 9 stations. Now, sometimes I will set 9 stations around the green, like just 9 cones. This time I just had them pick their own stations. I just was working with 4 kids. So they took 1 ball and their wedge and a putter, and their goal was to get up and down from 9 different spots around the green. Expectation-wise, if they could get up and down half the time, that's really what we were looking for. That's going to be a really good percentage for them. So basically, that's how our stations were set up the other day. When we incorporate the full swing, a lot of times what we'll work on putting for the first 30 minutes of practice. And then we'll go over and do a full swing station, a short game station, where we're just kind of doing those different exercises.
Yeah, I think the standard thing you see with a lot of high school players around the green, I would say they're one-dimensional. And when I say one-dimensional, they chip with 1 club. They don't use a lot of imagination. And I think that's where your chipping drills are really good, because we'll require that players don't use their high lofted wedges. We'll try to make them improvise. And a lot of you coaches who maybe are involved with both teams have seen this. I feel like boys sometimes can be more imaginative than girls can be. Girls are more one-dimensional. So the challenge, when you're coaching girls, is to really get them to see this and to buy into it and understand you've got to experiment and you got to practice these shots. You can't just try it one time and say, oh, that's not going to work for me. That's not the way I do it. Well, that's not how you change and become a better chipper. And I remember you and I had a phone call a few years ago with Mike Thomas, a PGA friend of mine who's Justin Thomas's dad. And we were talking to Mike about how to teach and how to practice the short game. And he made a comment that, Justin needs to be able to quantify his work when he's chipping. If not, he loses his focus and his concentration. And while repeating a shot to develop feel is very important, at the same time, it's not real golf. And if you look at what you see when you play, a round of golf, it's all kinds of different shots at different times. You never have the same shot 2 holes in a row. So you have to incorporate that mindset into your practices. Talk a little bit about when we actually do go out on the golf course and play, how it's not always about score.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go back to just a little bit on what you were just talking about. You and I had this conversation, just earlier this morning. And I think it's important to note the difference between block practice versus variable practice. You and I had that conversation. So, and just understanding as a coach, the benefit of both and incorporating both into your practice. So when we talk about block practice, we're talking about that repetitive ball striking. So, hitting 10 shots from a station with the same club in the same shot, that's block practice. Or if you're doing full swing, hitting 20 shots with the same club to develop a feel or to work on a technique, like that's your block practice. And it's important. It's important if you're working on something, if you're trying to make a swing change, if you're trying to develop feel. But at the same time, you have to follow that up in practice, or you have to have both. You have to have that variable practice. Maybe full swing, you have them work on work their way up through the bag with their odd clubs or their even clubs, hitting 20 balls with each club or whatever it may be. But then at the end of the practice, the end of the full swing session, you have them play a round of golf in their mind. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to hit a driver, I'm going to hit a approach iron, I'm going to chip, so whatever it may be. So that way they're not hitting the same club 2 times in a row. So same thing on chipping. You do the block practice so they can develop a feel, and then you do the variable practice where you're picking different locations and trying to get up and down. So make sure in your practice, and same thing putting too, you do that as well, where you're working on, you'll hit a lot of putts from maybe the same location to get a feel, but then you do another drill where you're playing 18 holes and not putting from the same location. So
yeah, and one thing that I want to throw in there that follows along with what you just said is when we take our teams, as a lot of you do, for practice rounds, let's talk about the regional, or we'll talk about to the state finals. I like to go to those practice rounds. I don't like to go the day before the competition. Number one, it's busy and it's hectic and it's distracting. But I like to go a day or two before the 2 or 3 days before the competition. And after you've done that, and your players and you as coaches have made good notes about the course that you're playing, then you can effectively play another practice round on your range tee, visualizing the shots that you're going to hit, starting with the first hole all the way through the 18th hole. You've just played it, you've taken notes, and this is a great way to really create a second or third practice round prior to the competition.
Absolutely. And I think too, full swing wise, when we're talking about that, if you have players that go to swing coaches, which a lot of coaches do, maybe you're not comfortable working on swing technique. Well, a couple things that players can really work on: developing a pre-shot routine and actually practicing that on the driving range. And we just talked about this last week, alignment, okay? A lot of our players had just started, coming out of the wintertime, they have really poor alignment. They're not picking a specific target on the driving range, so then their alignment gets all out of whack, which really can affect their swing path and their contact. So getting a set of alignment sticks in their bag and actually having them use the alignment sticks. And I'm telling you, if we don't tell our players to use alignment sticks, they're not going to use alignment sticks. It's just not they don't really like it. It's not really in their nature. At this point in their golf journey, that's not something that they are really committed to. So really enforcing, okay, let's set your alignment sticks down. Let's pick a specific target on the range and let's practice your pre-shot routine. That really can go a long way as a full swing station and something that coaches can really, really focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I use that analogy. You have to have gas in a car before you can drive it. And this is elementary for a lot of coaches out there that might not be PGA professionals. Grip, aim, setup, GAS. Grip, aim, setup. Those are the 3 things that you need to focus with on all your players all the time. And honestly, we'll do another podcast, on some of these instructional things. Real quickly, as we kind of wind this thing up, let's talk about what we try to accomplish when we go out and play on the golf course.
Yeah, and I think that depends on your team too. Sometimes you may need your team to go out and, hey, you're trying to figure out who's going to be in the lineup, so you have to make sure that everybody's in that competitive mode and you're playing for score. And, there are times where you do have to have that. Other times where you may not. There's a lot of things you can focus on. One of them, obviously, is course management. One good game that's actually pretty beneficial is having the guys go out or the girls go out and playing a scramble from the worst tee shot or the worst shot. So if it's just you and your partner, or maybe there's 3 of them, they go out and whoever hits the worst drive, that's the ball you're playing from. So you can get used to playing from poor lies or, just different lies. So that's kind of a good one, just kind of getting them out of their comfort zone. How to hit recovery shots, hitting shots from under a tree, just uneven lies is a big one. And then rules. So rules are going to be obviously a big focus. I think how to take an unplayable lie. What do you do if you go out of bounds? How do you take relief from a water hazard? Unplayable lies are probably a big one, even though we cover it. We may cover it inside. On a crummy day, we may go over all these rules just like we did last week, but when they're actually out on the course, getting them to remember, okay, what are my options when I'm hit into a red penalty area? That's where I think it's important when they're out playing for coaches to really be present, watch what your players are doing, how are they taking relief, How are they taking relief from a cart path, unplayable lie, things like that? You can really make a big difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a few other things that need to be stressed to your players. They need to keep their golf clubs clean at all times. You're playing a lot of bad weather here in the spring, wet conditions. Make sure your players clean their shoes. I'm sure so many players just throw their clubs and their shoes in the trunk of their car when they're wet, and it's not good for the life of the equipment. And, they need to have an organized bag. And when I say that, some of these bags I pick up, I can't believe how heavy they are and how much they weigh. I can't imagine trying to pack that thing around, particularly on an 18-hole day. So be efficient with what you carry in your bag. I know some players are going to need a lot of balls, that type of thing. Emphasize you're going to all here in Indiana have to watch the Pace of Play video, which is great about things like push cart etiquette and other things. Attitude is a major thing that we stress with our players. Be positive, no poor behavior. I always like the player with a demeanor that you can look at them at any point in the round and you have absolutely no idea whether they're 5 under par or 15 over par. They've got the same demeanor. They handle themselves the same way all the time. And I think that will help performance in a lot of different ways. So as we wrap this up, kind of give your final thoughts on what are really the keys to structuring effective practice.
Yeah, so I think a couple of the key points that we covered. One of the things you're trying to get your players to do is be prepared. This is the time you need to be at practice. You need to show up prepared. That's honestly just a life skill, and it's one thing that you can really promote in your practices is you got to be on time, you got to be punctual, and you have to show up prepared. So I think that's the number one thing. And then just giving them structure so that they know what to look forward to every day. This is how we're starting practice, and this is what we're going to be doing. You don't have to do your practices the same every day, but the structure so that the kids can know what to expect, I think, is really important. And then just making sure, whether it's chipping, full swing, and putting, do a good combination of block practice, variable practice. So you're giving the player a little bit of freedom, yet they're working on the things you want them to work on. I think those are kind of the key points that that I think every coach can do to have an effective practice.
Well, and we have the luxury of working together every day. So we probably talk about our high school team more than a lot of coaches do. But I think where you and I kind of tag team it very well, people listening to this can tell you're probably more structured than I am. I can't say how many days, every day of the week. At some point during the day, Crystal will say to me, okay, what are we going to do at practice today? How's practice going to look? So we never show up at the beginning of practice really trying to run this thing on the fly. I mean, we've talked about it, we've put it down, and if you have another coach that you coach with and you can talk about this ahead of time and be really organized, that's great. If you're coaching solo and you don't have the luxury of an assistant coach, then I would really encourage you to have an agenda when you approach every single practice, because if you don't, it's going to get away from you. And I think your players respond better to you as a coach when they know that you have a plan. And that's when you hold their concentration. And I think you lose it when things are a little bit too unstructured.
It can turn chaotic quickly, for
Very
sure.
easily.
Yeah, I know. You've given me anxiety a few times when I'm like, well, what do we want to do? I remember a couple years ago, I was like, well, what are we going to do for practice today? You're like, oh, I think they can just work on what they want to work on and they can do what they want. I'm like that gave me instant anxiety. I was like, I need structure. I need to know what the guys are doing. I need to know where they're going to be. So that's just kind of the difference between you and I. Both of them are good, but we've kind of learned how to kind of have that loose structure that I think is good for everybody involved, but it's a lot of fun.
Well, here's the opportunity that you have as a coach. The more effective that you can be with these practices, the better your team's going to be. And I firmly believe that you can outcoach people during the week at practice. And honestly, Crystal and I don't spend a lot of time coaching on the golf course during competition. I mean, we're with players, but we're there more for mental support than we are actually coaching them, because I feel like we've done our job during the week. And if you do that, then it allows you to take a little bit different approach to the competitive part of it. So, I love these podcasts because it opens my mind up for some things that we can talk about in the future. And right now, everybody's getting ready to begin the competitive part of their boys season. So we wish all of you luck and look forward to seeing many of you from Indiana down the road as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our first invite for Franklin is April 12th at Floyd Central Invite. So It'll be a fun one. Obviously, look forward to seeing a lot of coaches there. It's fun coaching network, coaching community that we really enjoy.
It is. So this is Ted Bishop along with Crystal Morse, and we thank you for listening to the High School Golf Podcast.